Shoegazing Podcast is back, this time with a new type of special edition episodes that will pop up every now and then, called Q&A specials. Basically, you listeners and readers of Shoegazing.com get to ask questions to some famous names from the classic shoe industry. This round is with Daniel Wegan, the Swede who made a name of himself working at the bespoke department of Gaziano Girling in England for 10 years. He placed second in the World Championships in Shoemaking 2018, and then he won the title in 2019. Last year he left G&G to start his own bespoke brand, Catella Shoemaker. And if you missed it, you can hear Daniel talk about the dedication in episode 3 of the Shoegazing Podcast, a very popular episode. In this Q&A special though, it's you who have decided the topics. A big thanks to all who sent in questions. We couldn't fit in all of them, but we got quite a lot covered in the near hour we talked. Among other things, Daniel's view on the current boom of more casual footwear and how he thinks this will affect his business, a breakdown on why bespoke shoes cost so much, how he works with the bottom of the lasts, why he is often wearing cheap New Balance shoes himself, and much more. So enjoy the listen. All right, Daniel Wegan, welcome once again to the Shoegazing Podcast.
Thank you once again.
You are the first that are part of a second episode, and this is also a sort of special one where we have had listeners or followers or readers sending in their questions. It's a Q&A special for the first time in the Shoegazing Podcast's history.
Very, very exciting.
Yes.
I'm very honored to be the first to...
I think it will be interesting. It will be a bit more varied than these episodes usually are, where I focus on one topic and around that. But here we have... we'll see how many questions that we'll go through, but... quite varied, and they're sent in from all around the world, from both shoe nerds and also some bespoke makers and other folks.
And normal people.
Yeah, exactly. Or actually not too many normal people.
No.
Only different states of unnormal.
Yeah, abnormal.
Yeah. But I think we should start with the question from Jacob Marshman, who seemed to work with shoes. He's writing this. As a retailer of high-end footwear, we're seeing a drastic change from formal business wear to more casual sense of dress and in turn footwear. My question for Daniel would be, does he see a future in continuing to produce such beautiful formal shoes, or does he expect to be pushed towards offering a level of bespoke footwear that is more inclusive of the more casual, would you say?
I think this has been a topic for many years. I think I've had the question before. It's a quite common question,
yeah.
both for people in the industry and also like maybe more from a consumer perspective, that you're looking at different shoes, and I think a lot of people. I think what's happened is not a lot of people, or not the same amount of people, have a huge use for a big collection of very formal shoes. I think a lot of people see these shoes and find them really beautiful and desirable, and they definitely want a pair or 10 pairs or however many they would like to have. But I think they probably find that it's harder to find the occasion to wear all these shoes. A lot of office environments have more casual dress codes. And also, as I think the landscape of people buying classic men's shoes it's way more global now. And there's a lot of areas with climates that are maybe not particularly suited for the traditional shoes, and there you see a lot more loafers, slipper types, commissions, still like in a formal style, but there's definitely a lot more demand for things other than like the traditional like cap toe Oxford in black or dark brown and so on. Maybe it's just my type of client that are maybe a little bit more adventurous. But I don't particularly make a huge amount of these shoes. It's probably something that's a little bit closer, further down the casual end, whether it be a full brogue, semi-brogue, a little bit more vibrant color, whether it's patina or some other type of leather.
But it's still quite, at least from what I've seen, it's still quite elegant dressy shoes.
Yeah.
Or more, like you say, casual colors and
yeah,
models.
I think it's mostly color and maybe texture of the leather where people start to bend the rules first. Because I still feel like, those kind of toe shapes, the bespoke makers and sole finishings that makers like me do on our shoes, they're almost desirable whether you have a need for formal shoes or not. Like, you look at it as a beautiful object and just like, oh, this is something I want to have or wear, It's almost like you're not really sure when you're going to wear it, but you want to wear it at some point. But yeah, I think once you start to building a small collection, you find that you might venture into heavier boots, lighter, more formal like summer shoes, like loafers and so on. So I think it's going to be a lot more common in future that people have a wider range of shoes rather than only buying lace-up Oxford shoes and building a huge collection of those.
It's only me who stubborn in
yeah, I would say that judging from your shoe collection, you are a little bit of an anomaly, perhaps.
Yeah, I get a lot of when I share these photos where I've shot the whole collection.
Yeah.
Everyone is just commenting on all the brown Oxfords and think
Yeah.
it's so boring. And
But I think like if somebody dedicates as much time and writing, doing podcasts as you do, it's obvious that you are of a slightly obsessive nature, and you find something you like, and you go back for the same fix.
I always, like you say, we want the shoes that we wear, and for me, this is the shoes that I wear. But for most people that, like you say, need more casual stuff,
so I
or
think
blah,
for
blah, blah,
for people that love that kind of shoe, there's not going to be a problem wearing those shoes a lot. There's no dress codes really, other than the rare occasion banning dress shoes. But it's nice to see that there's a way for people that just love shoes but not necessarily have a huge need for formal shoes, that they can venture into the world of bespoke shoes or high-end footwear in general and find something that suits their wardrobe or their lifestyle or whatever.
What about more, chunky stuff, heavier boots? Will Catella do that as well?
I think we don't see a huge amount of those kind of orders, but they do come in. I think if that's something that we would like to make, I think we have to start with making samples and showing people that it's something that we can make. Because I think a lot of people, they don't really think of a bespoke shoemaker as a place that makes these kind of shoes. And sometimes, those workwear things can be a little bit easier to fit. They're a bit larger generally, and they're not so dependent on being super sleek, close-fitting shoes. So you can maybe find a comfortable fit is something more like ready to wear and something that's you can kind of buy off the rack. But there are people that once they realize that they can actually have kind of whatever you want, it definitely sparks their imagination a little bit, and they start to think like, hey, I have a lot of these shoes, but I'd like something for my ranch or whatever. I have a lot of some customers down in Texas where you obviously have a huge Western boot culture, and they're worn by people that definitely never wear formal clothes, but they're quite happy to make the investment in Western boots, and they would probably be more interested in something of a more rugged nature, and get a bit of excitement out of the customizable. That they can customize these shoes and spec them out the way that they would like, whether it be leather, soles, shape, whatever. So,
yeah, speaking of the US, I mean, looking at that market today, the workwear style, with especially then with the different types of boots, is massive. It hasn't really made its way overseas in the same way here in Europe, and I believe also Asia. It's more sort of like
a niche.
Yeah, a niche, exactly. There's of course those people, but while in the US it's more of the Smiths wear that type of shoes. Where do you see that going, and what does that affect for the bespoke?
I think there's a lot of people that their first, experience in trying to, wear a certain style, whether it's like traditional menswear or if they're into streetwear or workwear, to just, simplify these segments a little bit, is that I would see it with people of my generation, that the first time they really pay attention or start to like build their wardrobe, they probably start with workwear. Maybe everybody wears a pair of jeans, and then they maybe start to be like, see the whole world of denim, and start to really nerd out on that a little bit. But then and then you have all like the typical like Red Wings boots and those kind of more like casual shoes. And I think what's going to happen with that generation is that once they've had all these kind of brands that are most commonly available, they're going to want something else. And they're going to want something that's within that kind of family of shoes, but maybe, bespoke fit, higher quality leathers, having the choice to really, because as the longer you're in a hobby, the more specific you get, more what you want, and then you realize that it's not out there perhaps, and then you're going to need somebody to maybe make it for you. And that's where I think a lot of these, I'm not hugely knowledgeable in what these brands are doing, but I would imagine that obviously bespoke and customized everything is a bit of a trend and a buzzword. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of these brands will or are already offering made to order or customized options. And
we see it quite a lot from Asian brands like Indonesia. We have loads of workwear makers making fully handmade customizable shoes, not still without bespoke loss or made to measure loss, but maybe that's the direction we'll be going.
I think like everybody wants to develop their product, and it can be difficult with very traditional silhouettes and products that the whole idea of them is that they're kind of old school. So it's hard to design a new shoe or a new style completely that's more contemporary, and for that to be accepted and appreciated by your customers. So it's more about, like classic men's shoes are, like most of the shoes bespoke makers make and consumers buy are basically styles that have their roots in the 20s to the 40s, and then they're just tweaks on that. You change the toe shape a little bit, but construction wise, leather wise, it's all very similar. And if you start to make something, once you put a sneaker sole on it, it's over. Like then it's something else.
Will Catella make sneakers?
Everything has a price. But I find sneakers to be very complicated to make well in a one-off format. They were made to be mass produced and are best made with machines. And a lot of the things like cup soles and so on, you have to do molds. It gets very expensive to make one-offs. And I see a lot of sneakers where you've tried to make them in a way that it's easier to just make one pair. They don't always look quite right, or you lose a lot of what's cool about sneakers when you try to make them out of other materials and other sole constructions to make it to suit the shoemaker. It becomes a little bit of a compromise that it's not that appealing to me. But I think in the future, depending on where like 3D printing goes and what kind of manufacturing methods especially makes it easier to make one-off for small runs of the sole units, because the uppers, they're really pretty much made as the way as any shoe upper is. You have a pattern and you cut the pieces and you stitch them together. But the way, you know, a lot of the soles, the sole is a very important part in the sneaker. And especially the cup soles, anything that requires making a mold for every size and every width, it can really, the costs can be a little bit intimidating.
It's easier to cut off pieces of leather.
Yeah, you have you can make like EVA soles, like the kind of early runners and so on. They're not too bad, but it's I think it's to think that because you can make really good hand sewn welted classic shoes, it doesn't mean that you can automatically just the next week make a sneaker that looks right. It's a different aesthetic, it's a different construction, and even though it's probably in a lot of ways a lot simpler, if you've never done it before, you're still going to need practice. Maybe not as much, but you need to do it a lot to get good at it, whether it's you know, sneakers, slippers, riding boots, whatever, you know, regardless of what it is and the difficulty level, you're gonna have to practice them all to do them really well.
Yeah. Cool. Let's take the second question here. It's from Simon Gunselman, who I believe is a bespoke shoemaker himself. He has a question about work-related injuries. He says that I have had massive issues after 5 years, from inflated tendons, up and down my arms, carpal tunnel surgery on both hands and other things. So he want to know what you do to keep yourself in shape, if at all. Sports massively helps him. And he also said it would be interesting to hear about... he says it would be interesting to hear about this from him, because I know a truckload of shoemakers who all have their tinier or bigger problems. So how has this been for you?
For me, I think I've been quite fortunate. I haven't really had any issues, especially not that have been really prolonged or been challenging to cure or get rid of. In the beginning, I had a little bit of like strained tendons. I think I was really tensing up my hands because you're not really comfortable in holding all the tools and they feel a bit awkward, so you compensate by just like cramping onto them, you know, especially like just like holding really heavy shoes in one hand with a wooden last in. If it's like a size 14, it's like holding a heavy basketball. It's kind of like you don't really know how to grab it properly. And that I did actually go to a fellow that helped me out a little bit and pulled me all kinds of ways to get it to release some tensions. And after that it kind of went away and never really came back. In the beginning, I tried to go, when I started my apprenticeship and my shoemaking career, I was still like trying to go to the gym a lot, but a few years into it, that kind of faded away, just out of lack of time or, you know, the inconvenience of dragging myself to the gym rather than just doing more shoes. So I haven't had anything yet, knock on wood. Hopefully I won't have any in a while. I think one of the reasons that I've been quite fortunate is because I have been probably had a quite varied work situation, in that I make both last and do some pattern cutting and do some making.
It's not as static as it can be.
No, I think there's a lot of people in the industry that you start out as maybe, especially I think the bottom making part, where you sit down on quite small chairs and it can be not a very ergonomic working position a lot of the time. And also the times that you have to spend, especially at the beginning, to get the work done. You really put a lot of hours in, hopefully, if you're doing it right. You're gonna... Just sitting in any position for that long is probably not that healthy for you. So I would recommend most people to like try to get out of the chair at least once an hour, try to do something.
And find different positions.
And I think, you know, there's this idea that you have to do everything in your lap, kind of the traditional way, but, you know, and and I work a lot like that, but I definitely think that there's a lot of people that are experimenting with stands and so on, and I think changing your position a lot is important. I don't think just because you put it on a stand, I don't think it's good to sit with that stand in that position for 10 hours straight. Try to move, circulation, and also try to keep in mind your posture. It's very easy to start your day with a good posture, and by the end of the day you're like kind of look like a macaroni bending over those shoes and trying to get the job done. But yeah, and obviously the guy who asked the question is go into the gym and trying to do different things and building muscle and probably core strength to save your back a bit. I think is hugely important. And then obviously everyone's different. Maybe some people are very sensitive to this, and some people can just treat their body like shit for years and they're fine. But usually it'll catch up to everyone.
But are you doing you just mentioned that you skipped the gym, but are you doing any other?
At the moment, I just run.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say that that's something that is particularly good for shoemaking. You're probably better off, like I said, like core exercises and trying to make sure your shoulders and elbows and things are strong, because
it's more of the overall
and I think a lot of people, when they talk about like carpal tunnel syndromes and these kind of tendons, and I see a lot of people working really with really blunt tools and things like that, and you have to start to use a lot of force instead. And so it's really important that you try to work, the whole cliche, like work smarter, not harder, to make sure your toolkit is in good shape and
sharpen your knife.
Yeah, people sharpen your knives. It's probably the most common thing I see, especially with the people that are new in the trade, because sharpening knives well is quite difficult, and it's something that you don't think about. So you start learning shoemaking and you think like, oh, what a pain, I have to learn to sharpen knives. But that is half the job. Before you can sharpen knives and a few other basic things, you can't really do the work. So you should probably better off learning to sharpen a knife before you even start making a shoe, because you're not going to know if it's your technique that's poor or your knife edge that's poor. And every time an apprentice would ask for help or something, I always ask them, is the knife sharp? And 9 out of 10 times it's not. And unless that's taken care of, it doesn't really matter, because it's hugely important. And even if you're experienced, you just get a different result when the tools are really nice and crispy. You can't make the same elegant cuts when you have to use a lot of force. Because you're working at the edge of your ability. You need to be more within a comfort zone to do beautiful work. If you're like barely managing, and your like arms are shaking because you have to pull so hard, it's not going to look very precise. So I think that's where people really mess up their hands, is that they hold the knife wrong and it's blunt. That's a huge issue. So you want to think twice, cut once, and do long single cuts rather than chopping away at it like you were like making like a wooden figure. Like try to not use your knife and your hands that much. Like use your head a bit more.
Sounds easy. I can presume it might not
be,
but
it's
that's
something that I've really tried to start to think about lately, is that I've always been like a bit I don't know what to call it, self-conscious about what it looks like when I work. I like to listen to like YouTube channels with people that like play instruments and things, and they mention a lot because they're interesting, because they're nerds too, and every nerd is the same. They just change item or activity, and a lot of them is what they seem to focus a lot on whether they play guitar or piano, is that like, okay, I can do this now, but I don't like the way it looks when I do it. Like, how can I change it so it looks more elegant or easier? And also, like, a lot of musicians have problems with this, like carpal tunnel syndromes and overstrain, just kind of out of the sheer amount of practice involved. So then it's like, okay, how can I be lighter in my touch and so on? And I wouldn't say in any way or form that like I'm turning into an elegant shoemaker, but I try to keep it in mind that like, okay, how can I do this kinder to the body so that I can do it for longer, hopefully, because I don't have a problem now, but you know, I can't really imagine myself doing anything else. So
you're still quite young.
Yeah, and I'm still quite young, so there's hopefully got a lot more time ahead of me than in my past. So if I want that to be the case, the first thing is to stay healthy. So I'm hoping that, you know, this might help. It'd be hard to compare what would happen if I didn't think about it, but if we have another podcast in 20 years and I'm still fine, you know, then we'll know.
Did good.
Yeah.
All right. Here's a question from Mohammed Afan. He runs a shoe factory in India. The brand is Bridland, I know. I'd like to ask Daniel, what's his go-to pair of shoes and why? And in the offhand chance that they're not classic shoes, he wants to know why.
So this is a very controversial subject.
Yes. And I know the answer, so...
Yeah. Shoe... Jesper will know if I'm lying. I don't wear a lot of dress shoes in my normal life. I think when I started with shoemaking, one of the reasons was because I really liked shoes and I liked wearing shoes. But my obsession is with shoemaking, not necessarily shoe wearing. And if I'm wearing shoes that I made myself, I find myself spending a lot of time thinking about how these shoes fit and how they look and how they crease and all kinds of obsessive thoughts. And I'm
for yourself or worried that what others would think?
Yeah, sometimes, usually, you know, I don't see a lot of people in my day-to-day life, especially not during COVID. Which has kind of reduced the need for formality to a very low level at the moment. So for me, it's become more like an occasion. I really like wearing them, and I like wearing them, you know, if I'm in London or if I'm going to see clients or if I'm going to an event of any kind where I might be wearing something other than my work clothes. But I'm always a little bit self-conscious that I always feel like people are really looking at my shoe and judging them, because obviously I'm a shoemaker and a fairly good one, and I'm expecting that everyone looking at my shoes should be like they were created out of the atmosphere and just perfect in every way imaginable. And as a shoemaker, it can be really tricky to find the time to really put that kind of effort into your own shoes, because if you have any kind of successful shoemaking business, you're always behind. And there's definitely a shoe for a client that needs to be a higher priority than your own.
Yeah, the shoes of the shoemaker is rarely the nicest ones. Yeah.
And I've still made myself a lot of shoes when I was an apprentice, and a lot of them I'm not very impressed by today, so I don't really want to wear them. So I've given a lot of them away, and some of them I've actually just thrown in the garbage. Because, you know, I get bad thoughts when I see them around, and they take up a lot of space. And
but I know that because we also have another question from Tor, our friend, who is saying, why is he running around in New Balance shoes for 50 euros?
Yes, well, usually
that's the answer to what you usually wear.
I try to make sure I can find them for a lot less than that. But I'm really treating myself if they're in the 50-pound range. No, I wear a lot of New Balance shoes in the workshop. They fit me really well. I've had an ankle from an old cycling injury that likes really cushioned shoes. Maybe not always, you know, 1/4-inch leather-soled dress shoes all the time. And yeah, I could probably build in some padding in my dress shoes, but the purist in me wants them to be exactly the way they should be. And if you make last and do use leather dye and working on a lot of other equipment, softer house shoes or trainers are quite comfortable. And I feel when I wear shoes like that, it's obvious that it's not something that I made, and nobody's looking at them and, you know, looking at my shoes rather than my face when I'm talking to them about, you know, what's going on there south below the ankles. And I also have like quite slim feet, and they're not always the easiest to make a really beautiful pair from. So I rather they look at my samples or the shoes that I've made for other people, because I generally hate the ways my shoes come out, because I would much rather have like a shorter, wider foot that gave like a more traditional shape, making pattern proportions look nice on really slim, long feet. It can be quite difficult to get a nice looking cap length or something that just doesn't look like a pencil, you know, because my feet just don't have much shape. They're just long and thin and on the flat side. So they're just, they're not what I imagine like the most beautiful shoe foot to make a shoe from. I prefer like a wider foot with a little bunion on it, or a high instep, or, you know, something creates like a nice dynamic shape. We'll see. I'm working on some shoes now that COVID is limiting me from traveling a bit, so hopefully I'll have something on that I feel a bit more comfortable and that feels representative of my brand at the moment. So that I won't have to have this question again.
No one will back it.
I have to keep this. It comes up on Instagram fairly frequently, so I need to shut those people up.
And Tor also has another question, which I'm sure you've had before as well, but which is the most strange or most extreme shoe that you've done?
Yeah, like you said, it's a quite common question, especially for people that, you know, might just find out that you have this job where you make fairly expensive shoes for all kinds of different people. And to be honest, my answer would be, it's very rare that you make very weird or crazy shoes. You know, I imagine that maybe companies that are known for making crazy shoes like Berluti or particularly come to mind, which have a big production.
With Christophe.
And obviously one of my favorite people, Christophe Corte.
Who only makes crazy shoes.
It's been a while since I saw something very classic there, but like he has a very good eye, I think, and to make like really interesting, more avant-garde shoes that look correct proportionally and doesn't just look like a mess is very difficult. So all the respect to what Christophe does. It's definitely an acquired taste, and he knows that as well, so I don't think he will take offense. But it's to do something interesting and unique that looks like nothing else but still has its own beauty in the world of classic shoes is something that's very difficult to do. And I see people try to, you know, make a shoe like nobody's ever seen before, and most of them frankly look like shit. So I think that's why you see so little of it, because it's quite difficult. And you know, I have some friends that work at Berluti and they make a lot of adventurous shoes as well, and a lot of them are definitely not to my taste, but it's nice that these brands are out there, because I think if it wasn't for those kind of companies like Corte many years ago when they started out making very unique shoes, and Berluti as well, I don't think there would have been much room in the marketplace for like a G&G or someone like me who obviously like builds on my history with G&G, with more slightly sharper shoes, like that kind of mix of traditional patina, English styles and adding patina to the shoes as well, which is obviously something that's very French to most people. So there's a lot of people that would probably not look at the kind of shoes that I make if they weren't something more adventurous, because maybe they used to wear something classic like an Edward Green shoe or something, and they see a Berluti shoe and it's like, oh, that's a bit too much maybe, but they get a little bit bored with the super classic. So I think they break a lot of ground for the world of bespoke shoemakers to find a niche for themselves. So somebody has to be like the rebel and make these shoes so that the rest of us can find our own voice and our own market, basically. Because hopefully there's a bespoke shoe out there for everybody.
What would you never do for type of shoes? Do you have anything?
The things I try to avoid doing is things that I don't think I would do very well. I've been quite fortunate now that I've been around for about a decade now. So most people that come to me, especially after doing some interviews with you and with Kirby Allison and some other things, that people are familiar with me and my work and come because they like me and my work. It's very common for a lot of other shoemakers, especially starting out, that the customers come in with maybe a picture from another brand that's like, hey, can you do this? And basically they like another brand that costs a lot more, and they want a new shoemaker that may be at a bit more approachable price point to do that. And a lot of times you kind of get what you pay for, and it can be really difficult for a shoemaker to copy a style. And especially when you don't know, that picture might be from somebody that has a completely different foot shape than this customer or whatever. And in those cases, I always try to tell people that I can make my interpretation of this, but I can't make it look like that picture for various reasons. First of all, I am not the person that made that. And I think working the way I do, where I do basically more or less everything myself as far as pattern cutting and, use some friends of mine for some of the stitching and the closing of the upper, a lot of my personality goes into the work, and it's very hard to rub that out and try to follow another maker's footsteps, perhaps. So even if I try to make his shoe, it probably looks like my shoe to most people, that they can see that I make it. And it's something that, most of the time it's something I'm quite proud of, that people consider my making to have an identity. But it can get in the way when you're trying to imitate or replicate a different style, especially if it's a different tradition of shoemaking altogether. Like, it would be very difficult for me to make a kind of, Austrian-Hungarian type shoemaking, which is a school and tradition of shoemaking. It's kind of isolated from the London one. Even though in theory they're not that different, but once you start working and you look at the end result, you can see that they come from different little ecosystems.
Yeah. All right. Here's a question from Di Perotti Boots. I think this is from Instagram, yeah. And so how do you prepare the bottom of the last? Do you try to mimic specific aspects of the structures of the foot and so on?
So this is a friend of mine, so thanks for the question. The bottom of the last is probably one of the most important parts of the last, because all your body weight is going down, so it's on the pressure on the bottom of the foot, and the bottom of the last is obviously what supports that. And it depends a little bit on who the customer is and what he's looking for. If some people come in with orthotics and things that they like to wear or been prescribed, and to wear in their sports shoes and so on, to correct knee alignments and all kinds of things, and it can be difficult for a traditional shoemaker to do exactly the things that the orthotics do, depending on, because sometimes they've been built in a certain amount of flex in them and so on, and they're not completely rigid, and it can be traditional leather footwear is not really suitable for this kind of fine tuning of flex. It's more about like fitting and supporting, but it's not performance footwear. It's a compromise between comfort and elegance, basically, and the longevity of the product. But I try to have at least like from the heel to the ball joint of the foot to have something that is kind of contoured to mimic the shape of a foot. And the differences is we put on the last what we call like a feather edge, which is you basically put a corner of the last, which will be a guide to the insole shape, and it's basically there to make the shoemaking easier. You needed this line to know the balance of the shoe, because if you had a round bottom, it would just kind of tilt side to side like an egg a little bit, and it would be hard to balance the shoe. And there were early lasts, and the feather edge more or less kind of developed more for manufacturing, because in the machine wanted an edge to use to. But the early last, a lot of them were very foot shaped, but it made it into a nightmare to balance the shoes consistently, and basically the shoemaker made its own feather edge with the insole or whatever. So I try to be somewhere in the middle of that, because to get a really nice crisp sole finishing, you need that kind of guide, that little, especially around the heel seat. You need that to build the heel as a reference point to make sure that everything is nice and straight. But then you still kind of dome the heel and so on, so that the foot can kind of sink into the shoe a little bit.
That's one of the main differences I would say that I experience from good bespoke shoes, is that the whole heel is sort of cupped, also the bottom of the heel, instead of having this hollow space in the back, which is more usually the case for flat-heeled ready-to-wear shoes, where you have this metal plate for the manufacturing process, and it has to be quite flat. It doesn't follow the foot shape.
No, especially for manufacturing, the heel seats are quite flat, because it's really hard to make a heel stack, a pre-made heel stack, fit on something domed. Or you could do a domed, theoretically you could go do a really domed heel block that would fit on a really domed last. But if you have a really domed last, you have to make a really domed insole. And to do all these things, you start mimicking a lot of the things we do as bespoke shoemaker, and they can be done. But a lot of these things are very time consuming, and then it starts to add a lot to the cost. So you're getting closer and closer and closer to a bespoke price point. And to create consistent, the biggest issue in a factory is consistency. Not to make one good shoe, but to make hundreds of them every week, sometimes 1,000. And to be able to do that, you need to make it easy. So everyone makes a different compromise, but one of the compromises is that you need to have last shapes that are kind to the workers and kind to the equipment. So that these workers and equipment can do the best job possible. But like you said, when you put your feet in a bespoke shoe made on a bespoke last that with a very kind of ergonomic shape, you really notice it. And then it's up to the consumer if they think it's worth it. And some people maybe need that support more than others. When you have a really domed heel cup, you feel a lot more supported. You spread your weight out a lot more rather than just at one point, and that can make you able to wear the shoes for longer in comfort. And then you can support your arch if they're slightly dropped, so that you have better alignment in the knees. I would never say that these shoes are orthopedic shoes, but there's like a term within the industry called kind of ortho bespoke, which is basically nicer looking bespoke or orthopedic shoes, because orthopedic shoes have a reputation of being awful sometimes, and a lot of it is because they're paid for by the government as a medical aid for a patient, and these things had to be made to hit a low price point, because they're really just a utilitarian object that as long as it corrects the issue, that's all it needs to do. But some people, might not want something nicer to wear, or think that their shoes are ugly and, almost highlight their ailment rather than disguise it. So there is a lot of, I think it's way more common now that customers come and they both want a beautiful pair of shoes, but also for them to have more of like an ergonomic fit that's going to help them and not hurt them with certain issues. And I try to do whatever it takes. If they come in with an orthotic that has a shape that works to them, I sometimes try to copy that shape completely. But some people come in and they don't have any problems. And if you do a super ergonomic shape, they might not be really comfortable with that, because when it's that close fitting, I think we talked about it the other day with when you have like the metatarsal area.
Yeah, with the pelot.
Yeah, we call it pelot in Sweden, but yeah, it's like you support the metatarsal arch, so it's almost like you have a little bump in the middle, behind the ball of your foot to support the metatarsal arch. And if you build that up to fit very closely, it won't allow the foot's natural flex, and it can be a little bit uncomfortable. So you might want to like tone it down a little bit. It's nice to feel that it's there, but if it's really built up, it might feel really supportive and comfortable for 10 minutes, but it might not do it for 10 hours. And then it can be really hard to change that again. So in some of these cases, I try to, if it's not broke, I'm not going to try to fix it. So I try to just make sure that a customer with still healthy feet has something close fitting and that's in harmony with his foot shape. But I don't try to correct people that don't need correcting, so that can cause more problems that weren't there in the first place. So it's definitely a case-to-case basis. But when I look at the bottom of my loss compared to a lot of other makers, I definitely go for a more built up arch and try to fit the metatarsal area as well, just partially because I like the way it looks, and also it gives you that you can feel the shoe touching you all over, rather than having tight areas and then areas that are just like empty cavities. So it creates a more interesting shape, and when you look inside, you see shape in the insole, and not everybody cares, but some people do. It just makes it unique and different, and if it gives me a kick and it gives the wearer a nice experience, you should put it in there.
Yeah. This is from Martin Krasovic. And he asks could Mr. Wegan break down the costs of producing bespoke shoes of this level, and how that is reflected in their relatively high price? Not the easiest questions, I presume.
No, because I think it's very difficult to price. Basically what we try to do is to find the price point where every customer can get serviced in a way that's appropriate to them. And it's very difficult to predict how complicated each project is going to be. If some people have a very easy fit, you don't spend a lot of time or make on the fitting process, but maybe they have order a shoe style that's very complicated. So and then you might have a person that orders a very classic kind of simple shoe style, but they're a very complicated fit, or they might have other demands that requires a lot of time.
Or they have both.
Which is not completely uncommon, especially if you make more, adventurous footwear. And rather than pricing everybody differently, we have a price point where you basically it's kind of like an insurance policy that if there's a problem, we can afford to rectify it. If it's a fit issue, we fix it. If it's a color issue, we fix it. If it's just anything that's, not, people are underwhelmed with what they've received, which is so far hasn't happened. But it's also about, so basically what you have to cost into each shoe is materials and time.
And time is definitely the highest cost.
You definitely pay more for the time. The leathers are probably the most expensive leathers in the world, but compared to the time, they're quite affordable. But for first pairs of shoes with multiple fittings and maybe trips and hours spent out of the workshop going to see people to fit them, and whether it's in the UK or in the US or here in Sweden, all of that has to be paid for, and people want you to come and to do your trunk shows fairly often to make the fitting time shorter. So to make sure that all this happens in a smooth manner, and also that for us to be able to afford to, when we design a pattern for a customer, to make sure, do a test. Does it look as good as I want it to look? If it doesn't, I need to do another one. So I do multiple tests of each pattern to make sure that it looks right, and it looks right on left and right foot as well, if the feet are really different. So in theory, you can cut a lot of patterns in an hour if you want them to, but in practice, to make them look the way they should look at our price point and to meet the client's expectation, it can take a day. And that's what, and then you're looking at probably 8 hours instead of 1 hour. And if you say, maybe if you're earning, I don't know how you're costing it might be really different from each firm, but if you're costing your hours, including workshop space and equipment and so on, whether you're costing it at 10 pounds an hour or 25 pounds an hour, once you go from 1 to 10 hours, the price increases significantly. And it's basically you just pay for the time and for us to be able to fix a problem. And I think that the fixing potential issues, that's a big part, because I think there's a lot of firms out there that might price themselves lower, and if they need to fix something, it puts them in a really financial strained position, which forces you to be stressed, and it forces you to maybe not stress over fixing the problem, but you have less time to spend on the next project for another client, and that's unfortunate, and that makes it impossible for that shoemaker to deliver his best. There needs to be a level of financial comfort to create something really great that people, and we're basically selling a product that in people's minds, and hopefully in our own minds as well, is some of the best in the world. And to do that consistently over and over again, you have to make sure that you are happy in your life, not too strained financially, because as an apprentice you might be able to live off of the passion of shoemaking, but as you get older, I don't think anybody would like to feel like they've been punished because they picked shoemaking as their profession. I believe that the people that make really beautiful shoes in the world are unique people that have a very unique commitment, and that they should be rewarded. And I can assure everyone that there are very few really good rich shoemakers. And I think Jesper can
Yes.
attest to that as well. There's nobody getting...
If you want to get rich, get away from shoemaking.
Yes, everyone, if you want to earn a quick buck, run while you can.
Yeah. But if you were to sort of... I know it varies, but I know that people are very interested in to sort of break down how much time do you spend on first making the last and the fitting shoe and then correcting the last and then doing pattern and bottom making closing and bottom making and the finishing and so on.
Yeah, I think the easiest one to break down we can start with is basically if you have a last that fits and because the fitting process is so unpredictable, you can do one fitting and it's really good, and then you're looking at like maybe last making, pattern cutting, making a fitting shoe and so on, and some adjustments. You may be looking at 2 days, 3 days. But if you have a complicated fit, you might have to do all those things 3-4 times. And then you're looking at, you're getting close to 2 weeks almost once you're done. And then it's almost like a non-profitable exercise that you just have to do to make sure that the client is happy, and hopefully you build a relationship where you allow to earn some of that time and money back later on future projects. But if I have a last that fits, and if I do cut a pattern, cut the leather, sew the upper, and then assemble the shoe, and then all the finishing process of the upper, whether it's antiquing, patina, and shining, you're probably looking at probably like 80 hours on average. If everything goes according to plan, you might be down to 60, but I've been doing this for 10 years and I've yet to have a project go all to plan. There's always something that's, not quite right. You might get to the point where you've cut the pattern, made the upper, and then you pull the upper over, and when you stretch the leather, a little flaw pops up, a little vein goes somewhere, and you just, you can't make it go away. So you just put it in a box and make another one and start all over again. And that's what has to be paid for again. And these things with the unforgiving material as leather, these kind of things happen all the time. And it's not because the shoemakers are bad. It's the nature of the craft.
No. If you visit the bespoke shoemakers, you always find half-done projects laying around. That something has come up, and
and it's like, okay, this is not quite right, or that
or you make an error, you slip with the knife.
It's usually those things doesn't happen too often, but they're bound to happen sooner or later. If you do it long enough, it will happen, and it will be horrible when it does, but it's that's what happens when you have people making things. They make human mistakes, and especially something that takes so much time. When you're sitting with a project for hours and hours, the more you do it, the more likely you are to make a mistake. There's just, and I think I talked to a fellow the other day that's just started shoemaking, and I think everyone who starts shoemaking, there's so many little things you do that you don't really think about. That if you do anyone who does a shoemaking course, there's so much time spent doing little things that you don't really consider shoemaking, just preparing to do something. And there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong there as well, especially whether it be skiving, whether it be when you do finishing. To do beautiful finishing is something that just takes years to perfect. Even though you know all the tricks, just doesn't happen automatically. You follow the instruction manual, and then you're done. You're like, what's this? So it's one of those things that you just have to do over and over and over again. And like about the breakdown of the cost, it's basically a shoe takes between 80 to 100 hours when you actually break it down realistically. If you include all the little jobs that need doing, just cleaning them, lacing them, put them in a box, packing them up safely so they don't get destroyed by the shipping company. Or once you start till they're actually out the door, it's definitely 80 to 100 hours. always. And
so
then
it's a lot of hours behind it, obviously.
yeah,
They need to cost.
and I think you can see it. Like, I know a lot of firms in Europe that make more lower cost bespoke shoes, and you can see it in the product that they just have to move through the hands or through the people in the workshop a lot faster, and it's easy to, there's an issue there that you don't see, pay attention to, and when you look at shoes that are given more time and more attention, they look better. It's hard to work quick and perfect. You have to, take a deep breath and chill a little bit. And
there's usually a reason for the price.
yeah, I would say there's very few real rip-offs coming out of independent shoemakers. I can't speak for all the big firms out there, but any small workshop with just a couple of people. And I think also I think it's important for the consumer to look at the product and make their own decision. Does this investment give me the emotional reward that I'm looking for? Because the reason we look at beautiful products is because we want to feel something. And people have to trust their instincts a little bit. There's a lot of forums and things out there where people just want to be told what's the best shoe, and there is no such thing. And people have to, look around, see what they feel like. And if you go to a shoemaker and the shoe he makes for you is comfortable and you think it's beautiful, then you have to decide what it's worth to you. But I can assure you there's very few rip-offs out there. I would say an average shoemaker is a very hard worker. I know a lot of people that work a lot less for a lot more. It's not a job that you can kind of coast through. But yeah, the consumer should educate themselves to know what they want and then make a decision. A lot of things that we buy are not always, rational. And some shoemakers might look at the way I work and think, oh, that's a waste of time, or that's really slow. But to me, it's the only way I know how to make shoes. If somebody told me, do the shoes in half the time and sell them for half the price, I wouldn't know where to start. Like, I've never done that. I can only make shoes like this. And maybe one day I could if I had to, but that's a new skill. Making shoes in 40 hours instead of 80, that's a different job almost. Because I don't know where I would cut half the time. I know where I maybe could cut half an hour or whatever, but to chop half the time off, yeah, that's gonna be a long project.
All right, Daniel Wegan, thank you very much once again for being part of the Shoegazing Podcast.
Thank you for letting me talk about shoes a bit. It's my favorite thing.
Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this Q&A special of the podcast. For much more on classic shoes, visit shoegazing.com. And as you might know, those that want to support Shoegazing and the continued work producing high-level content, you can become a patron and contribute with anything from $3 a month. See patreon.com/shoegazingblog for more info on this. Both big and small contributions are much appreciated. No new podcast episodes have been recorded yet, and as I mentioned before, Corona makes things a bit more complicated, since I prefer doing the interviews in person. I think they come out better when you can sit face to face and talk with the interviewee. But fear not, the Shoegazing Podcast will be back eventually with a new episode, so hear you again soon.